Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Playmore69 here, aka Michael, and this is the All in All Podcast, episode 17. In today's episode, I will be discussing a little bit of the drama with H3H3 versus Jordan Peterson. This was quite an interesting story that came out, I think it was last week. This really started. It seems to be on the 14th of January. In short, H3H3, aka Ethan Klein, actually deleted his two podcasts that were with Jordan Peterson. And his rationale behind this, and I will be putting this tweet up for everyone to read, and also I'll be leaving the links in the description if you actually want to confirm that these tweets are real. And I don't know if they will be deleted or not, but obviously there should be some screenshots or whatever, but I will throw a screenshot up on screen. Anyways, this is Ethan Klein's tweet about this. He said, "Years ago, I interviewed Jordan Peterson before I was very familiar with his politics. He was an interesting guest who I enjoyed sitting down with, but especially now I can see he is dangerous, or a dangerous gateway to alt-right transphobia and COVID misinformation. I removed both the interviews today." And this was quite interesting to me because, at least from the tweet at face value, we have the three accusations of alt-right, transphobia, and COVID misinformation. And of course, just looking at it like from a fan of H3H3, obviously this is enough rationale to just say, oh, well, this makes perfect sense. This guy is terrible. But from someone who actually knows Jordan Peterson and H3H3, I'm very familiar with both of them, I think I can give a pretty good neutral argument, or at least a neutral perspective on this. The COVID misinformation is a very heavily thrown around term because it seems like if you are talking with someone that has slightly different COVID beliefs than you, it seems people are very quick to say just COVID misinformation, like just very blatantly. And I don't know if I would necessarily call Jordan Peterson COVID misinformation. I think, has been pretty rational, at least from what I've seen from his takes. He's not some sort of crazy anti-vaxxer or whatever. But I also liked his idea about giving a date for a country to fully open back up and say, like, hey, you're either going to get vaccinated or not get vaccinated by this date, but the country is going to open up on this date. And to me, that made a lot of sense, especially because I think it's a lot better of a solution than kind of just waiting around and, sometimes doing lockdowns and sometimes don't, and waiting for people to get vaccinated in that way. I think setting a date and a deadline would be at least a lot more productive, because it would actually set a deadline to say, like, hey, for the people who want to get vaccinated. For the people that don't, you don't have to, because obviously the people who don't will be weeded out by private businesses and companies that can choose whether to hire them or keep them hired if they're vaccinated or not, which it seems a lot of companies are going that way. So at least for that accusation or that statement about the COVID misinformation, I don't know, maybe Jordan Peterson has had much more crazy COVID takes, but I haven't heard anything super insane. The next one I'll go into is the alt-right. So again, notice how he said gateway in the tweet, and I find that very important, because if you're accusing someone for being a gateway into a certain thing, it doesn't mean that they are that thing. Because, for instance, I can say Ethan Klein is now a gateway to leftism online, or radical leftism online, because he seems to be the case. It seems that Ethan Klein has become a lot more left over the years, which is completely fine. I'm on the left. I think he was much more of a moderate left on at least years ago when he was on, or when I saw a couple episodes on his podcast, especially when he had Jordan Peterson on. But it seems now that he has a podcast with Hasan. He has pushed a lot farther left. At least that's what I've seen. And, it's completely fine. I'm not saying that that is a bad thing, but I think the more opposite of a side you're on, like for instance, if Ethan Klein is truly more farther left, he will easily call someone who leans conservative like Jordan Peterson to the alt-right. And I really hate when people on the left kind of do this. They kind of start saying like the alt-right pipeline and all this. It's like, well, yeah, but you can also use that sort of argument for anyone on the left. Like you could say like Destiny, who is a political streamer, say that he is a gateway to the radical left, which again, on its surface kind of makes sense, but because you could watch a Destiny video and then you could, go to Hasan and then you could even go farther left. I mean, it's very possible, but you can see how that argument it doesn't really hold a lot of weight when you consider the fact that pretty much anyone on any side of the political spectrum can be a gateway to the radical side of that political spectrum. So I don't really like that statement so much, but I mean, that's at least for the second one. And the third one I would go into is transphobia. This one I agree with because Jordan Peterson's takes on trans people seems to be quite, I think, old, I guess I would say, or more in the sense of he doesn't seem to understand it that well. He kind of just equates it to they're lost in some sort of way. And I've never really heard any good arguments that he's gave for trans people, and that's why I think that he could be labeled as transphobic. So that was Ethan Klein's tweet, and those were his 3 reasons. He basically said of like, hey, this is why I don't want to keep those Jordan Peterson videos up. I just want to remove them, and that's what he said, obviously. And I guess looking at it at face value is this seems quite rational, but I guess the only thing I would say to that is why did it take him years to remove it? Is it because over the years has he shifted a lot farther left, and now the fact that he is much more on the left, he thinks that, oh, I don't want to associate with anyone on the right, even just leaning conservative whatsoever? That's kind of what I'm getting from this, and I'll also get to Jordan Peterson's tweets now. Obviously, these will be on screen as well. And his first tweet was, "What are you up to, Ethan? We had good conversations. I enjoy meeting with you and talking with you. What I have said precisely that motivates your actions and your accusations, deleting our discussion, an honest question." He continues, "You might seriously consider providing me with the footage so I can post it, given that I agreed to appear on your show based on the agreement that there would be, in fact, a show. Also, I should warn you that there are those who engage in cancel culture genuinely lives to regret it. I am not going to come for you, except politely, in this Twitter stream. But the chickens will definitely come home to roost." His next tweet, "You will be held to a higher and higher and soon impossible to maintain ethical standard by the very mob you currently wish to please. Then you will make a mistake and they will devour you with glee. Please take this warning seriously. I liked you." And his last tweet is, "Why don't you come to my LA show and see for yourself once again who I am? That would be a lot better." Before we get into the Jordan Peterson tweets, I would also like to add that you are probably seeing a live wallpaper or visualizer, as I call it, for the podcast. I'm basically trying something a little bit different, and this will basically be in all of my future audio quote-unquote podcast, just to make it a little bit better of an experience. So basically, if I don't have a video podcast, I will be using a sort of live wallpaper as a visualizer for the podcast. Hopefully that's a little bit better. And as always, for these visualizers, I will leave a link down in the description if you actually want to download it and, use it for yourself. So just wanted to clear that up and make sure that that was known. So if you ever see a podcast of mine and that there is a live wallpaper or visualizer, just know that the link is always down in the description below. All right, now touching on Jordan Peterson's tweets, they didn't really seem to be anything out of the ordinary. He seemed to just speak about cancel culture and why he believes that it is bad and that engaging in it doesn't really solve much. It really only puts a target on your head, and also asking for the footage as well and asking questions about why would he delete the conversation. But to me, at least my theory is that H3H3 now has a podcast with Hasan, which ultimately has probably pushed him a lot farther to the left. I think H3H3 knows that, he kind of has to conform with that far left that Hasan is, and sort of cultivate an audience that way. Because I think that H3H3 wants to stay relevant, and he might think that, hey, my Hasan podcast that I have now, which is one of my most popular podcasts, I think it gets the most views on his channel. He basically probably believes that staying far left is a good idea, or at least moving farther left. And maybe starting a beef with Jordan Peterson is actually a good thing, because now it would make sense for Ethan or H3H3 to actually create a beef against Jordan Peterson, another popular person, someone he's even had on his show, where stirring up this beef and creating this drama will only create more talks around H3H3 and his podcast. But I even have another deeper theory than that, and that might be really contributed to Hasan in this case. Hasan recently has seemed to watch a few Jordan Peterson videos. He seemed to talk about him a little bit. Sometimes he goes through phases from what I see. I do watch a lot of Hasan's content, to where sometimes he watches Jordan Peterson, sometimes he doesn't, but it seems to be every couple of months. But he was recently watching Jordan Peterson right before this beef kind of started. And he mentioned that he would love if Jordan Peterson could come on their podcast. I think it's called Leftovers. And this is a podcast with obviously H3H3, Hasan, and, sometimes they have guests on, I think, and they wanted to get Jordan Peterson on. And it was quite funny that Hasan said that, because he said that literally right before this drama even happened. So even though this is a theory, I still believe it holds a lot of weight. This might be a drama that was started to actually get Jordan Peterson on their new show, to maybe reiterate his points, and maybe for H3H3 to have some sort of backup now in Hasan, because Hasan has always wanted to debate Jordan Peterson. I know he said this multiple times, and I think that H3H3 would want him back on the podcast, because that would get him a lot of views. Because at the end of the day, all of these people are entertainers online, and what do they thrive off of? It's views. And for every creator that does this online for a living, they need views. And this goes for all three of the people involved here. Whether it's Jordan Peterson, H3H3, or Hasan, they want views at the end of the day. And maybe this was a sort of drama beef that I don't think Jordan Peterson is in on it in any way, but I do think this could be a beef that maybe Hasan and H3H3 could be in. Because it seems quite odd to me that they've actually talked about Jordan Peterson on their podcast only a month ago. So maybe we should have saw this coming. I'm not 100% sure. But at least that's kind of my main theory going at it at this point, because this drama was quite big and a lot of YouTubers actually talked about it. And I think the more people that talk about this situation, the more it's hyping it up for a grand finale. And I think that grand finale would be Jordan Peterson actually going on the H3H3 podcast again. Theories aside, I kind of would like to make a little bit of a prediction with H3H3 going forward. it seems that he is cleaning up his past, or at least trying to at the moment, because he still has a lot of podcasts out there that are, I guess, not friendly to today, especially the one that I can think back with iDubbbz. And this is actually one that I checked, and it is still up on his channel, H3H3 Podcasts, and you can literally view it right now. So the reason I'm referring to the iDubbbz one is because he said a lot of slurs in the video and said a lot of things that really wouldn't say today. Now, obviously, we know that H3H3 has moved a lot farther to the left, and that's mainly because, well, he has a show with Hasan now. He seems to sort of see that this is the future, going farther left. And it seemed to me in 2017, when he was doing these interviews with Jordan Peterson and also with iDubbbz that I'll touch on, is that this sort of maybe light conservatism, like basically anti-SJW, seemed to be a little bit more popular back then. And that's when the anti-SJW movement was kind of like at its highest, was basically back in 2016, 2017. And I think H3H3 tried to follow that wave to an extent. And now he sees going farther left is the better play. And really what I'm getting to with this is that I think he is going to start deleting a lot of his old podcasts because obviously they don't align with him today. I don't know exactly what he said on those Jordan Peterson podcasts that he actually had Jordan Peterson on, because he had him on for about 2 episodes. I don't know what he said. I wish I did. I think I'm going to try to actually track down those videos. I'm assuming they're re-uploaded online somewhere, and hopefully be able to watch them, because I think that that would be quite interesting to see. But I did watch a little bit of the iDubbbz one, and from what I saw with that one, is because I remember that one being particularly very vulgar and very just, it seemed to be very anti-SJW, which he seems to be very pro-SJW now, because that's just how the sort of internet landscape has been. It was anti-SJW back in 2016, 2017. Now it seems to be pro-SJW in, 2022 now. So I would like to go back and actually watch those podcasts with him and Jordan Peterson, but at least the one with iDubbbz, I would think that that would be the next one on the chopping block that he will delete and try to hopefully get rid of from his past. And I guess also an interesting sort of thought with that is, will he address it publicly, or will he just delete it privately and actually let people figure out for themselves? And maybe it won't become a big thing like that, but I don't think he's going to tweet at iDubbbz saying that, like, oh, you are spreading misinformation, so therefore I'm going to delete this podcast, even though I was the one also saying these vulgar things in that podcast. So I guess that's something to look out for, at least from H3H3, is probably more deletions of his older podcast, because at least from my perspective, because I actually did watch H3H3 back in the day when he first started his podcast. He was actually one of the biggest podcasters at the time. I still think he has a great audience, or at least a bigger audience. But back then, I think he was like top 5 podcaster. And when he started out and had all these amazing guests, he seemed to be slightly to the conservative side, maybe slightly to the liberal side. He never really seemed to be radical, but this is the first time that, at least with this drama with Jordan Peterson, it has really shown his radical side, that he can't even have conversations he had with someone about 4 to 5 years ago on YouTube anymore, because it might be putting him in a box that he does not want to be put into. And I guess I'll end this sort of drama segment on the podcast, or really this main topic on the podcast, is that I understand that people's politics change over time, and that's obviously the case with Ethan Klein. But it seems to me that Ethan is following the trend because he was such big fans of Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, iDubbbz back in 2017, around that time. And now, at least, I haven't heard him say anything about iDubbbz, but I know he was a controversial figure. But now it seems he says a lot of negative things about Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan. I've seen him, say things publicly negatively about them. And I can't help but wonder, is he shifting his politics because that's what his fans are? Does he know his fans are a lot more left now because of him, at least collabing with Hasan a lot and having a podcast with him? Is he just shifting to be relevant still rather than truly be genuine with his political take? I guess that's something that we can't conclude now, but maybe in the future, when obviously we have more trends and more data, we can actually give an accurate assessment of H3H3 and his political takes. And is he just shifting from one side of the other just to stay relevant, or does he truly change his mind about something? So I think that's where I will end this segment of the podcast and just finish with the last segment, which is just some general info about the podcast and a little bit of changes that are going on. Just want to keep everyone up to date. And one of them is I've actually linked my Discord to my YouTube channel. So if you want to private message me about any topics or anything like that about the podcast, you obviously can. My Discord link is now on my YouTube channel, so you can reach out to me there. Just if you do DM me, just a quick message about saying like, hey, I know you from YouTube or whatever. That would be nice. A random DM. I might not, understand right off the bat. So, just to clear that up. And yeah, if you want to private message me about anything on the podcast or a topic, or even maybe coming on the podcast, because, I would really appreciate guests. I just haven't really got any yet at the moment, but you can DM me on Discord at any time. So the link is there. And also the one other change that I wanted to go over, which is just for the audio podcasts that I have, is the visualizer. So basically the thing you're seeing is just a live wallpaper. I got it from livewallpapers.com. I'll obviously leave the link in the description. The only reason I'm really doing it is because, I do a lot of audio podcasts, even though I want to make a video podcast standard. And I think having the visualizer, or at least the live wallpaper, would make the podcast just slightly better. I don't know. I'm kind of tinkering around with things and, just trying to experiment with the podcast and try to improve it any way I can. Again, it's only episode 17. I still have a long way to go. I don't plan to obviously quit the podcast anytime soon. So yeah, I have a long way to go before I can even perfect it. And I don't even think I ever will. But, at least I'm on the way to at least making it a better experience for the viewers. So I think I'll call it there. Sorry for the short podcast this week, but I hopefully will come back with a longer episode next week. If you have any comments or any suggestions in the comments below, I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, see ya.